Chase Young is a San Francisco 49er. John Lynch chiming in on how it happened, why it happened, how good is Chase Young, what are the anonymous scouts and coaches saying about Chase Young, and how does that D-line stacking up now in San Francisco during this bye week? All that and more coming up on today's Locked On 49ers.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On 49ers. Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker at BD Peacock at Eric_Crocker. Thanks everybody for making us your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Appreciate all of the everydayers out there. Make sure you are subscribed on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code, all lowercase, LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Let's start with John Lynch's comments, Croc, about Chase Young and how the trade went down and why he was the target for the 49ers. And I thought this was really interesting because we saw earlier on Tuesday before the trade deadline, Montez Sweat going to the Chicago Bears for a second-round pick. And you thought, well, that's okay. Then that means they traded Sweat and they're going to re-sign the free agent to be Chase Young. And that's the way they decided to go. And nobody was really expecting at that point for the Washington Commanders to trade a second starting defensive end, but that's exactly what they did. And according to John Lynch, speaking on Wednesday, it was actually the target all along for the 49ers, that he was the guy, and that the conversations eventually did sort of creep into talking about Sweat a little bit, but Chase Young is the one they identified and the one that they were looking at all along. And it sounds like John Lynch was burning up the phones for at least a month. And probably some of these phone calls started around the time before they traded for Randy Gregory, because I'm sure that's what came of it. There was like, oh, we're going to wait. He calls Martin Mayhew of Washington, and he's like, oh, no, we're going to wait and see what happens the next few games, and I'm sure a lot of those conversations happened. Were like, oh, we're trash. Please take a player and give us whatever we can get, right, for Randy Gregory. So they made that move then. It sounds like Chase Young was one all along. He was calling about cornerbacks as well. But the connection that John Lynch had with a former executive for the 49ers, Martin Mayhew, who moved along to Washington, and by the way, gave the 49ers a comp third pick in the process that the 49ers gave back almost essentially. It wasn't that pick, but it was the same type of third round comp pick is what they ended up getting because Mayhew signed as GM for Washington, and that's what the 49ers used and gave Martin Mayhew back for Chase Young in this trade, although it wasn't the exact pick they got for Martin Mayhew signing as a GM out of the 49ers organization. But the personal connections is a big reason why this deal was done. I thought that was super interesting, Croc, and that maybe this deal doesn't get done if John Lynch doesn't have that relationship. And I think that's one of the strengths that John Lynch has is because of his, he's got a gold jacket. I think he's good with people, has a lot of relationships. I think he's competitive and relentless. He's going to call people, going to talk to people. He's going to wheel and deal. He's aggressive. And I think if John Lynch calls, it's if a GM is sitting there and John Lynch your phone's ringing and there's 31 teams calling you and which line John Lynch is, it might be one of the first ones, if not the first you pick up for a lot of teams. And I think that's a huge benefit to have John Lynch in that regard, and that personal connection with Mayhew especially is maybe the reason this got done, which was sort of a last second deal that they didn't think was going to happen. And in the end, it ended up happening for just that comp third pick. So I don't know. I thought that was interesting. And, the personal connections are so important, especially in front offices around the NFL.
Since the time the 49ers hired John Lynch, it almost came off as a politician, right? It's like you have Shanahan, who's kind of the hard-nosed football guy, and he kind of handpicked this team. But you know what? We need a face, on this whole thing. We need that guy that's going to be out front. It feels like, John Lynch throughout his entire tenure has been the guy out in front of everything, speaking for, the majority there with the 49ers. And really, when you think about his, just the relationships that he has built, or whether it's around the league from playing or now just front office, like, with Mayhew, who's also a former NFL player as well. It's been really cool to kind of see how that has really worked in his benefit. Remember when the 49ers traded for Jimmy Garoppolo, it was a direct call from Belichick to John Lynch and was like, hey, I think he's going to be in good hands with you two. So can we make this happen? Let me know right now, yes or no. So I think there is something to the relationships that he has built with guys around the league.
No doubt. I think it's really important and certainly helpful to grease the wheels when there's trades like this getting done. And you've seen multiple deals happen with certain teams. You've seen the 49ers go to certain colleges that they trust the information they're getting and draft multiple players from certain colleges. So, and you see that a lot with just front offices around the league. You see it a lot in the NFL anyway, with, straight up nepotism in some cases, but other cases, just like who you know. And almost everybody I've ever known, same with Matt Williamson, my co-host on the Peacock and Williamson show, by the way, subscribe every day, talking about the entire NFL. He was a former scout for the Browns, and he got hired because he knew somebody, and somebody knew somebody, and he got the interview that way. And then the staff he was with at the Browns got fired. He didn't know anybody from the incoming staff. He's gone. He doesn't have a new job with the Browns because he doesn't know anybody. And almost everybody I've ever met or heard speak about their job and how they got into scouting and into a front office, it's because they knew somebody. Almost 100 times. So relationships are huge. And if there's somebody you don't like, you're probably not going to deal with them and help them out. It's probably almost, it's not that different from your fantasy football leagues, to be honest. There's certain you have that are a lot easier to make trades with than others, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I was just talking to one of my buddies, former NFL player, played 12, 13 years in the NFL. Yesterday we were just talking about him, and he'll call from time to time. And we were talking about him like doing some front office stuff. He's kind of getting into some scouting and talking about the right situation, right fit for him. He really wants to be involved in pro scouting. And I brought up his relationships, like just how he is with people. And he talked about how he has all 32 GMs in his phone that he can call, any of them. And the big part of it is just understanding how to, present yourself to people. And I think, again, when we look at the 49ers, Kyle Shanahan, he comes off as a cool person, but the football side, he can be kind of a hard ASS a little bit. Yeah. But I think just, again, John Lynch, that's the guy I feel like most people want to talk to. And when you are talking to him, I think you feel a little bit like you're not getting duped, like you're not, somebody's trying to get over on you.
One more note from John, or a few more notes from John Lynch about the Chase Young trade and the deadline as a whole. The story about Adoree Jackson, that last second trade that they didn't get done in time, he said that was completely false and, quote, not true at all. So, and I think that one was.
A lot of our comments were saying that too. They were saying that guy is like a fake person or a fake account or something like that. And I saw that going through on the comments. They were like, nah, like that's not a real guy, not a real guy. So shout out to the faithful. They were all over that.
Well, the reason I thought there was some credence to it, and first of all, that tweet happened like right as we were hitting play and going live as the deadline was ending. But Tim Kawakami of The Athletic, earlier on, like right after the trade or right after the Chase Young trade, said he had heard that there was another trade that was about to happen, and everyone's like, well, okay, they got the edge guy. It's got to be corner, right? So it was a good guess by that fake tweeter if that was a fake report. And who knows what other conversations the 49ers had, but. Obviously, they didn't get a deal done for a cornerback, and John Lynch was asked about that, why it ended up going for another edge player, which seemingly they've got so many defensive linemen. And I want to talk about the pedigree for some of those defensive linemen in a little bit here, Croc, and all the high draft picks that they've collected now on the D line, why they went Chase Young instead of a corner. And Lynch said, quote, I felt like it was the best deal to be had. We had a number of conversations. We've been of the philosophy that it starts up front, and that was the deal that made the most sense for us. So basically they just thought that was the most impactful trade they could make. And when you look around at the league and players that were traded, and to be honest with you, I would rather have Chase Young for a comp third than Rasul Douglas, right? That the Bills got. I just think it's potentially a bigger difference making player.
Also, and when you say that, my mind goes directly to Jalen Johnson, a cornerback who a lot of people wanted, right? You want to make that trade worth it, and he's a very talented cornerback. But what was it going to take to get him? Obviously you would have to sign him at the end of the year. I think it would be much more draft capital, maybe even for the 49ers, potentially a first-round pick, at the very minimum, a second And we're not talking about third round comp picks. So I think if you are John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan, you're working the phones and you're hearing, all right, you can have Jalen Johnson for a second, and it's your original second round pick, or you can have Chase Young for a comp third. I think I would have leaned with Young as well. Even though I want that corner, like I'd say, hey man, let's get that cornerback. But I guess now you have to kind of turn the page and look at the draft and see if you can find a guy maybe late first or second round there that you really like. But Chase Young, you weren't going to get a guy like that, especially like in the open market. More likely, if you don't want to overpay for him, this is a perfect opportunity for them to spend very little. And they still have third round comp picks as well. So you spent very little, and you get to utilize this guy as a rental for at least the rest of this season.
All right, more on Chase Young, more on that defensive line, more on those draft picks that the 49ers are still left with after the trade deadline, even though they did make a pretty big trade. And a little note on Nick Bosa as well coming up next. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by DoorDash. I don't know if it's just me, Croc. Is it the same way for you? I associate football with food. Anytime a game's going to be coming on, I got to make sure I got a spread ready. And for me, I can't really do things like wings necessarily because I got my hands clean. So I might have to take some notes on the football game because it is technically work. And it's definitely what I like to tell my wife on Sundays. Like, hey, honey, sorry, I'm working. So let's call DoorDash and get some food in here. I'm not going to ask you to make me food while I'm sitting here watching football all day. And I'm sure not going to make any food today. Maybe I'll make a little something. And if you did want to make something and make a big spread, you could go to DoorDash for your groceries as well. But just about anything you need that you want to do and eat on football Sundays or whatever game you are watching, you can find it at DoorDash. And you're not going to root for your team on an empty stomach. So order DoorDash, save on all of those football party favorites. You can order yourself some wings, pizza, just about anything. I like to go Pizza Hacker locally. A Super Duper Burger in the Bay Area is one of my favorites as well. Get whatever you like for you locally. 50% off, up to $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first DoorDash order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23. Subject to change, terms apply. Don't forget, use code LOCKED23 for 50% off, up to $10 value on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and spend $15 or more. Okay, Croc. How about this one? I like this quote from John Lynch about Nick Bosa. When asked about, he was on Murph and Mac, by the way, on KBR Wednesday morning. He said, he was asked about Nick Bosa and the lack of sacks. And by the way, right now, do you know, Croc, who the current sack leader is on the San Francisco 49ers?
Yeah, it's Chase Young.
It's Chase Young. Chase Young's got 5. I believe Bosa has 3. Somebody else has 3. Javon Hargrave has 3. Drake Jackson got 3, I think, all in week 1, right? Yeah. Eric Armstead 2.5. Fred Warner 2. Givens 1. Greenlaw 1. Those are the sack totals right now for the 49ers defender. So Chase Young way ahead right now. And a little bit more on some quotes on some folks that were maybe down on Chase Young, why he was able to be brought in for such a late pick for someone who's so talented and who's not that recently or not that long ago, a number 2 pick in the draft and still on his rookie contract. By the way, Nick Bosa, most pressures in the league this year right now, 44 pressures, tied with Dexter Lawrence with 44, Max Crosby 43, Micah Parsons 43, Aiden Hutchins at 42. That was before Monday Night Football. So I don't know if Hutch added more pressures. I assume he added a couple. He might be number 1 right now. Josh Sweat 40,
also
39. So yeah, Bosa's doing.
I was going to say 49ers defensive line has 156 combined pressures this season, which is also number 1 in the NFL.
Yeah.
So for a lot of us, I mean, we've been talking about the pass rush or lack thereof. And it's like the pressure is there. They're not able to quite finish. So I think out of those 156 pressures, if you look at their sacks are a little bit lower. So we just kind of need them to, get home 1 or 2 more times per game. And I think that would make a drastic difference, right? Like, especially if you look at last game, some of the plays that Joe Burrow was able to extend, if you are pressuring him and you actually get him down, boom, plays over, done. Instead, what we were seeing was he was extending the plays and then either making plays with his legs or with his arms to pick up first downs, which kept drives going and obviously put the 49ers in a very bad position. Or you had to cover longer on the back end. And I mean, we don't trust the guys to cover, up front in general in normal time span, let alone having to cover for longer because the pass rush maybe flushes a guy, then he has longer to kind of throw the ball. So hopefully adding a guy like Chase will kind of help them just get home, especially on like a third down when you need to get them off the field.
Yeah, no doubt. And their pressure to sack rate is not good. And I have a feeling there's a whole lot of sacks coming. Addition of Chase Young will help that. And sacks just tend to come in bunches anyway. And the last couple of weeks, they've played two really good quarterbacks that are really good at getting the ball out in time and when they need to. So that also makes it a little bit more difficult. And there's been so many plays where you see Nick Bosa beat his man, and he's so close to getting that sack. And the ball comes out, or there's no pressure coming for it anywhere else on the defensive line to help push someone your way or him to push it to another guy's direction for that other player to get a sack. So I do have a feeling the sack numbers are going to jump for a lot of players on the 49ers defensive line. John Lynch had this to say, though, about Bosa when he was asked about that. And he said flat out, Nick Bosa is dominating. He said, if you know football, turn on the film and you can see how good Nick Bosa is playing. So John Lynch has zero problem with the way Nick Bosa is playing. I think it was Grant Cohn that asked if this week asked Kyle Shanahan if Brock Purdy was going to get replaced at quarterback, and it was just like you could tell Kyle was just mad at the question and frustrated with it. And he's like no, and so Grant's like, why? And he's like, why the hell would you change your quarterback if there's no reason to? So a lot of fans it's just to show a lot of fans out there are like, oh, Nick Bosa got paid and now he stinks. And Bosa's saying a couple of weeks ago how he's still getting, and I think it did maybe affect him, especially earlier in the season with the holdout and not being in form. And maybe he would be half step closer and gotten a few more sacks if it wasn't for that so far this year. But he's playing good. It's not like he's playing bad just because he only has 3 sacks. Sacks isn't the greatest barometer of how good a player is playing. And, Brock Purdy's had some subpar moments the last couple of weeks, but no danger of Brock Purdy getting replaced at quarterback. I think people can rest assured about that.
Yeah, we talked about that the other day. I don't think he's playing any different. I think he's playing very well. Now, you also said, well, I think he's a little less frenetic, but just in the sense of kind of like the execution of plays and throws, it looks to me exactly like last year. The biggest difference is like some of these passes, they're just getting caught like by the opposing team.
Yeah,
and that's been more of an issue than anything else.
I think the last couple games he might have had like 1 or 2 more throws that were like, what are you doing there? But it's not much different at all as early in the year and earlier this year, maybe a little more calm in the pocket versus last year. But again, not that much different. He's been pretty much the same dude, which is a good thing.
We weren't going to talk about Brock today, but there were a lot of concerns during training camp with just turnover-worthy throws or throwing interceptions. And then people made a mockery of that over the first 5 games. It's like, oh, what happened to training camp interceptions? Then all of a sudden it's like, ping, here they go. Right? I mean, imagine if that interception where they call it roughing the passer, which I still think is kind of, I mean, I'm a defensive guy, but I'm like, man, that should have been his 3rd pick, right, of the game. So, you start to kind of look at that and maybe if some of those balls are caught against the Giants, which they weren't, guys had to play defense on them, like they weren't great passes. He is showing that what he showed in training camp, like, I will put the ball in harm's way. And that was the one thing that I wanted to see him kind of stay away from doing it to the extent that he is. Now, he's not like leading the league in interceptions or anything like that. But I think when his interceptions happen and the fact that they've happened in bunches and there were other ones that potentially, like there is something there, especially if you aren't going to be the guy that like does things to overcome that, right? Because right now it feels like there's a lot of playing within the structure of the offense, and then okay, boom. Like, but can you make the explosive plays, explosive throws that lead to touchdowns to where it kind of offsets the interceptions, as opposed to, well, I'm throwing all these interceptions and we're only scoring 17 points. Like, you can't be that guy.
Yeah, no, I totally agree there. And they looked even worse because of when they happened late in the game. You're down trying to come back in the game, and then you throw some picks and just like kind of soul crush.
That's tough
in some of those cases. Last one from John Lynch, and it was something we talked about just yesterday about the 49ers not making a trade for a cornerback. Well, they might get some reinforcements very soon. John Lynch did say that 5th-round rookie cornerback who we still have not seen, Darrell Luter, and last year's rookie, 2nd-year corner Samuel Womack are both on the verge of having their practice windows open to return from IR. So that is, or actually, I think Luter's technically on PUP, right? And Womack's on IR, I think is how it is. But both of them could start practicing soon. And maybe as soon as the 49ers come back to practice after the bye and start getting ready for week number 10 that we're going to be on against the Jaguars. So, yeah,
I might go to that game.
I think it'd be a fun one. I like the Jaguars. They're a fun team. They're good at stopping the run. It's going to be a Purdy game, I think, potentially. And it'd be nice to have, it'll be fun. First of all, watching Chase Young out there. And do we know what Chase Young's number is going to be yet?
I don't know. I'm hoping he gets number 1. I don't think anybody has number 1. And I just think he looks sweet. He was number 2. I know his defensive line. People are like, what? Number 1? He was number 2 at Ohio State. Looked sweet in that number 2. Just big, jack guy. Looked like a creative player. Give him number 1. Obviously, can't give number 2. That's Deommodore Lenoir right now. But give him number 1.
Can D linemen wear single digits or just linebackers? Because I know some edge guys, technically linebackers are wearing single digits, but D-line can too?
I think anybody can.
Okay. Except not offensive line.
Except for offensive line. And if you are coming in, you have to like report or whatever as an eligible receiver, however you do that. But yeah, outside of offensive line, I think numbers are up for grabs, whatever you kind of want to wear.
Next, Croc. The average, I'm going to let you think about this if you haven't seen it yet. I tweeted it earlier on today. What is the average draft pick for the top 8 defensive linemen on the San Francisco 49ers on the depth chart? What is the average draft position that they were taken in their particular NFL draft? So I want to talk about the draft picks the 49ers still have post Chase Young trade as well. And a note from Mike Silver talking to some coaches from the Commanders and what the word is on Chase Young coming over and maybe why he was able to be had for just a late 3rd round pick. Next. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by, and I know it's not a crossover Thursday this week because the 49ers have a bye, but it's still this Thursday episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. With basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League, a league created specifically for combo projections that includes 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, LeBron James plus Travis Kelce. At a 10.5 combo, 3 points made plus receptions. So those are super fun. And I can't wait to play some of those on PrizePicks. And guess what else you can do at PrizePicks now as well? You can play with famous folks if you want to. If you want to play alongside PrizePicks favorite players like rapper Meek Mill or comedian Andrew Schultz, you can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the PrizePicks community each week and play along with them as well. And our listeners get a special deal as always. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedonnfl or download the app. Use code LOCKEDONNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, prizepicks.com/lockedonnfl or download the app. Use code LOCKEDONNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Okay. If you had time to think about it, Croc, what do you think the average draft selection was for the 49ers' top 8 defensive linemen?
I'm going to say, if I had to put one number on it, 10th overall. Because you got Cleveland Farrell. Yeah. You got Nick Bosa.
Number 2.
You got Chase Young.
Young was number 2.
Then Armstead went pretty high, too. He was like 17th overall.
Yeah. Armstead, 17. Javon Kinlaw, 14. So that's 5 first rounders the 49ers have. Now, the next few is going to bring it down a little bit more. Okay. But it is a first round pick combined or average because then you have those are the top 5 picks, all first rounders. 49ers have 5 first round defensive linemen right now. They got 2 second round defensive linemen. Gregory was the 60th pick. Drake Jackson was the 61st pick. And then Javon Hargrave, who they just gave big money to, it was the 8th highest selected on the San Francisco 49ers defensive line. He was a 3rd round pick, number 89 overall. So when you add all of them together, it's actually the 31st pick in the NFL draft is the average between all of them. But it is top 10 if you average just the first rounders, which is kind of crazy. So the 49ers have a ton of talent on the defensive line.
Sometimes we do see let's say when, you come next Sunday, 49ers are playing Jacksonville Jaguars, and they're gonna show the defensive line, and it's like it's Nick Bosa and it's Chase Young and it's Eric Armstead, and see all, and the Cleveland Farrell's in there or something, right? Maybe Hargraves is on the bench, and they're gonna show like where these guys are drafted. It's like doesn't matter. Like Cleveland Farrell was a top pick, it didn't work out, right? Like it didn't work out with Oakland. Like Chase Young was a top pick, it didn't, it wasn't great with Washington for whatever reason, injuries and other things that we'll talk about in a second, but. Those are the things where it's like, yeah, like they talent wise, like they got it, but they didn't quite work out some of them as being that top guy. But I bet that's something that's going to come up when people show like, oh, look at these guys, like look how high they were drafted. It's like, I don't care about that. Can you get the sack? Can you sack Trevor Lawrence? That's all I care about right now.
Sack the quarterback. I don't know if you can tell. His son is just starting to move and it's destroying me through the window right now. I'm trying to find something to block it. How about this, Croc? The draft picks the 49ers have left after the trade. They still have a projected 11 draft picks left after trading one of their comp thirds. They still have a comp third, and they have yet to trade. Miraculously, Croc, they haven't traded any of their first, second, or third round picks yet. So the 49ers right now, after the trade, still have 11 picks. They're projected to have a comp pick, a compensatory selection for those who don't know, which is when you have more outgoing free agents than incoming free agents. So, for example, they lost Jimmy Garoppolo, who got a pretty big contract because he's a quarterback. And so the Jimmy Garoppolo deal cancels out the Javon Hargrave deal. So, you're not positive or negative there on incoming or outgoing free agents. But they also had another big money free agent in Mike McGlinchey that signed elsewhere. So they're projected to get a third round compensatory pick for Mike McGlinchey. So they still have two.
What about Jimmy Ward?
Ward, I believe, is going to get them a fifth. So they still have three. So they have 2 fifths and a sixth. So it's Amenahu and Mosley and Ward, I think, are the three that's going to end up giving them those comp picks. So they're projected to have, and it depends who you look. I think over the cap is different. These I got from NFL.com. 2 fifths and a sixth comp pick as well. So a maximum, I think, of 4 is what you're allowed to have in the 49ers. It looks like we'll get 4. Maybe it ends up being 3, depending on how the formula goes, because the formula is secret, but people have kind of cracked it and do pretty spot on accurate projections of those picks. So they couldn't trade that comp for McGlinchey yet because they technically don't have it, but they did have the one they got for the D'Amico Ryans and Rand Carthon. So they were able to trade that one. So anyway, first round pick, second round pick, third round pick, a comp third for McGlinchey, their own fourth round pick, a fourth round pick from Dallas in the Trey Lance trade. They traded away their fifth in the Christian McCaffrey deal last year, but they still will have at least 1 or 2 fifth round compensatory selections, a sixth round compensatory selection. They don't have their own sixth. That went to Denver in the Randy Gregory trade, but they got a pick back from Denver, a 7th rounder from the Randy Gregory trade. So they have their own 7th and the 7th from Denver as well. So a first, second, 2 thirds, 2 fourths, 2 fifths, a 6th, and 2 7ths. So still 11 draft picks for the San Francisco 49ers. Draft season is going to be a lot more fun this year, Croc.
I know our numbers kind of dipped just a little this past draft. They're like, dude, what are y'all talking about? 49ers don't have a pick until late in the third round. We don't want to hear about any of these guys. Yeah. But now we get to kind of dive into what should the 49ers do? Should they even look to maybe potentially get another receiver? I know. I'm the one that's been talking about the offense, and I wish they would score more than 17 points. Maybe having more of a dynamic third receiver would maybe just help them a little bit, right? Because right now, I think we're feeling it. It's like Ayuk, okay, George Kittle, but it's like, man, you don't have Deebo Samuel out there. I think, do you agree? Do you think the 49ers are kind of feeling really not having like that other receiver, especially when Deebo's out?
Yeah, that's also one of the notes from Kyle Shanahan speaking this week. He kind of mimicked. I was really glad to hear it because I felt like I was going crazy. He said there was a lack of speed out there on offense. And so I think we might see Ray McLeod instead of Juwan Jennings if Deebo can't go. Hopefully Deebo is able to go. But I think I don't know if they're missing because as one of our listeners pointed out, the 49ers scored 31.5 points last year in games where Deebo Samuel didn't play. Just missing Deebo Samuel is not it alone, but clearly you want to have Deebo Samuel. I think in the Browns game, it hurt because he was a big part of the game plan and he was in the game to start and then they lost him mid-game. So that hurt. I think they were missing an element of explosiveness in the last couple of games, especially needing to get the ball out maybe a little sooner than normal, even with Trent Williams out on top of it. So I think it's probably the combo of having both Trent and Deebo at the same time rather than how much they were missing one of those guys, and a lack of explosiveness, a lack of speed. I think I saw that on the field for sure.
Kyle can say that, but it's not hard to find a speedy receiver, athletic, that can play. It's just he keeps looking at the wrong guys, and every time we're like, that's not really the, it's like Danny Gray. Everybody's like, oh, he's fast, and I was like, hey, he doesn't really play like that though. So he's got to listen to Peacock and Peacock, our draft evaluations on some of these receivers to find that guy, right? Like that, I feel like we can find that guy that gives you the speed, gives you the ability to run routes, get in and out of breaks, but it might not be to the extent of what he likes, because he also likes that 3-cone. Because he wants to pair some of the things with that 3-cone, and sometimes like, dude, don't overthink this. Get a guy that maybe he's not fast, but maybe a guy that can still help you stretch the field, that has enough speed. I would love to see the 49ers go and get Coleman, the kid out of FSU, 6'4", 6'5", basketball in his background. He's super athletic, very fluid. Some people were saying maybe 49ers don't have a chance because they're talking about him like, is he going to be there with Marvin Harrison Jr.? Like, are they kind of rivals? Like, some people were like, oh, Marvin Harrison Jr., one of the best prospects we've seen. And now people are like, Keon Coleman, he might be better than Marvin Harrison. I don't know about that, but I do know people like him that much. So he might not get past the top 10 or top 15. But it would be nice to see Kyle go after like that guy that we've been asking for a long time. The guy that makes the quarterback right even when he's wrong, but also has good athleticism, also has speed. But he's a big target. Juwan Jennings, he's so specific, right? It's like he's got to run this type of route or that type of route. You start asking him to do other things, which we've seen. He's not great at that, right? Like, who's that big target that can run and stretch the field, catch the ball downfield, contested catches that can be multiple in your offense? And I feel like the 49ers just kind of missing that guy that can stretch the field as well. So hopefully they can find that guy. I know we're a long way from the draft, but it would be nice to have that receiver.
If I had to bet right now, those three top picks, first, second, and third round pick, as long as they haven't traded them by draft time, which is entirely possible, I think there's a pretty good chance that there's an offensive tackle selected in there, and there's some sort of a playmaking, athletic speed type of a player. Now, Kyle doesn't like them tall and fast, Croc. So you might only get fast and not tall. You might get big, but with good feet, power forward, to replace Juwan Jennings if he walks in free agency. Although there's some talk maybe is the restricted, because he was, I don't know if Juwan Jennings might still be restricted free agent. I'm not sure. But anyway, yeah, I would like to see some more speed out there, and usable speed, not just track speed. I don't care what the track speed is. I want a fast player, a guy that plays fast. And it would be nice to have someone that is really good tracking the ball down the field and go up and get it and bring it down.
All right.
I wanted to talk a little bit more about this idea of Chase Young being undisciplined, but I think I want to save that to tomorrow. It's going to be too long of a conversation here for us to finish this episode because we're already out of time. There was an interesting note from Mike Silver that we're going to get into on tomorrow's episode, Croc. I've got actually another note on Juwan Jennings. I got a note on George Kittle about a record-breaking moment that could potentially come in the next game for Kittle against the Jacksonville Jaguars after the bye. But who Chase Young is as a player, maybe go back and watch some more tape. I've been watching more tape of Chase Young and give our scouting report on Chase Young, what some Commanders coaches and other folks around the organization said about their former player in Chase Young on tomorrow's episode. So stick with us every day here on Locked On 49ers. Make sure you are subscribed, just like all the everydayers are, on YouTube or anywhere that you get your audio podcasts. And of course, Croc and I will be back tomorrow right here, Locked On 49ers.